It's high time I showed you another Sicilian Kalashnikov. So that's this opening. E4, C5, knight F3, knight C6, D4, an open Sicilian. Black takes, knight takes, and now black plays E5. So this puts pressure on white straight away. It challenges white. Where should that knight go? There are lots of options here, but only one of them is really any good. And that's knight b5. And then after d6, this is the Kalashnikov. And, well, you might have heard me talk about this opening King within and about my book, King's Kalashnikov Sicilian, and also my chessable course of the same name. Now, I was sent this game just the other day by Christian Saudar from Norway. He played this in the Norwegian Championship 2023 third class in Oslo, and he's very proud of this game, and rightly so. It's a superb game. In fact, I played against Christian just the other day when I was doing the Hand and Brain stream with Anna Rudolph, and we played a Rossolimo against him. We narrowly avoided the dilemma of what to play against the dreaded Kalashnikov. Anyway, let's take a look at this game. What I like about the Kalashnikov, why I think it's very suitable for someone who wants to learn more about Sicilian, is that very often you get a fixed pawn structure, very similar pawn structure in a lot of these variations. And if the pawn structure is fixed, then it's much easier to determine plans. And there are lots of typical ideas that black can employ. So let's bear that in mind. So in this game, Christian's opponent, Torfin Malumfitya, I've probably butchered that, but anyway, played c4. So this is one of the main lines, and a lot of people recommend this as one of the best ways to play against this opening. So white goes for this massive clamp on black's centre, but as we're going to see, there are plenty of ways to fight against this Maroczy bind. And, well, I won't say anything more. Bishop e6, good move. Knight c3, standard development. And now once the knight comes to c3, then we can push this knight on b5 and it goes back to a3. So it means that this knight has to take time to redeploy. And in the meantime, black actually gets a little lead in development. Bishop e3, bishop g7. By the way, this is my recommendation in the course and in the book. I like this fianchetto because it sort of aims at d4. It might support the knight coming in here. It's really dynamic. You'd be amazed how often this diagonal actually opens in this position. So it's a very dynamic way of playing. Knight c2, covering the d4 square. Well, that's very logical. Although there are downsides to that. Sometimes it makes it easier for black to play b5, this great hammer move. Knight f6. I think this is where the knight belongs, because it looks at all these squares, and that can be quite interesting. Bishop e2, preventing knight g4, and black castles. So you could say the main move here is to castle, and well, of course I deal with that in the course, and I've shown actually a few games with that main line on the channel. You can look those up yourself. I'll put the links down in the video description and in the comments as well. But here white plays f3. So that's a little bit unusual to play this move at such an early stage in the game. But I sort of understand why this is played, because that e-pawn does need support. Very often black is able to strike out with b5, and because this pawn isn't so well protected, well, you can get away with b5. Rook c8 played. Very reasonable, very logical. You know, there's a little bit less support for the pawn now that the knight has moved. And when you get pieces lined up like this, then it's very logical to play the rook to c8. Just that's where the rook belongs in this line on this semi-open file. And again, it's possible to castle kingside. White plays knight d5. So I thought this was very interesting because clearly with f3, supporting that pawn on e4, this was white's idea. So white just wants to throw that knight in on the big d5 square as quickly as possible. So this is slightly unusual. So how should black deal with that? I mean, there's more than one way of tackling this, actually. Perhaps you'd like to have a little think. How would you play here with black? One thing I would say about this line with the pawns on e4 and c4, black always has to be aware of how to break out. You can get squashed in this line. So really important to think, how do I break out here? Okay, you have a think, black to play. I'll have a slurp tea. Cheers. How are you going to deal with this? Well, Christian played it very simply. Bishop takes knight, and that turns out extremely well. And I think it's a very decent response. But there are some more other interesting lines. So, for example, you could play knight h5. When the pawn comes to f3, then this is a very common idea. And after, for example, white castles, and then the knight comes into f4. So you can see that white is being tempted to exchange, and then that opens up this diagonal. Could be interesting to open this one up as well. So knight f4 is certainly not knight h5 and knight f4. Very interesting idea. b5 appeals to me. Now, in the course, I call this hammer time. This typical b5 break. So you're chipping away at white's big centre. And this is quite possible. So, for example, if pawn takes pawn on b5, then you take on d5. And then knight e7, you can see there's pressure here. We've isolated this pawn. Black has a very solid central pawn structure. This opens up as well. Okay, knight b4. Let's say queen a5, queen d2, a takes b5. Strategically, black has achieved something here. Because, you know, this is not so great. And, you know, maybe we can play e4 to open things up again. Or who knows, the queen might dive back here to attack that pawn. So b5 is interesting as well. Another way for white to play is to exchange on f6, avoiding the exchange on d5, and then exchange here. Now be careful, don't take because of queen a5. Castles, and then just rook b8, defending that pawn. And then, well, we can see that black intends another typical Kalashnikov idea. I call this liberation station. You want to break out with d5, and that gives black this 4-3 kingside pawn majority, which is very nice. Control at the centre. And yeah, it's a real breakout move. So strategically, you know, that's quite a nice way for black to play. So one idea, knight h5, another idea, b5. But Christian plays bishop takes knight. Very straightforward. And white plays e takes d5, and I think that's a mistake. I think, for better or for worse, white should play pawn takes. And it's a really interesting position. It's possible to put the knight back here, and we've got a strange kind of King's Indian position, where this knight is slightly oddly placed. Then again, black is lacking a light squared bishop. Nevertheless, that's not so bad. The knight coming in here, potentially f5. Knight d7, and so on. But actually, the move that I really want to play here, I still find that a little bit slow. I want to play knight d4. Now, in the course, I call this the Trojan horse. You see it so often in the Kalashnikov. You throw this knight on d4, sack a pawn, and it opens up this diagonal, and it opens up this diagonal as well. Whoops, that diagonal. I'm getting very enthusiastic about these diagonals here. So, for example, knight takes here, bishop takes. With the pawn on f3, you see that has weakened all these dart squares. Queen a5 check. And we can exploit the fact that the king is still in the middle. And if bishop c3. Oh, thank you very much. We're in. And knight takes. You see, I told you that bishop. It's amazing how often that bishop on g7 comes into the game. Just opens everything up. Okay, queen d2. More tricks here. Queen takes, knight takes. You get the pawn back, and wow, that is just a fantastic bishop. So material is level, but black has a clear positional advantage because that bishop is much better than the bishop on e2. Best move is king f2, but obviously black has compensation here, where queen b4 threatens knight e4 again. Very interesting compensation for black. So I think c takes d5 is the better move, but knight d4 is very tricky indeed. But e takes d5 played, and this plays into black's hands. Even knight d4 is possible here, actually. That opens things up nicely. But there's actually knight e7 as played, and this gives black a really nice position, because this knight is going to spin round to f5 to look at some nice dart squares. And there's also pressure here. And, well, for example, if castles, b5 is an excellent move. We're just trying to undermine the support for this one. If takes, then knight f takes d5. And this kind of exchange of the queenside pawns for white's centre is quite a common idea. This is actually a tremendous position for black. These centre pawns rolling down the board, a beautiful steamroller, are so much more powerful than these pawns. They're just on the starting blocks. Great position for black. So after knight e7, white played a4. Obviously trying to sort of forestall this idea of b5. You could still play b5 here, actually. But Christian plays knight f5. Yeah, we want to grab that bishop. Very understandable. But more than that, we really want to break with e4 to let that bishop just rip across the board. It looks fantastic. White played bishop g5 and then h6. Well, why not? We would like to bag that bishop, and then black dominates the dart squares. But the bishop went all the way back to c1. And now, excellent move. e4. When you've got this lovely pawn majority here, 4 against 3, let's use it. This is what I love about the Sicilian defence, is that black's king is completely safe. Why? Well, look at all these pieces around the king. And once you play e4, well, that doesn't harm black's king. But once you start knocking out these pawns, then you can see white's king, even if it castles, just doesn't have that much pawn cover. And it's going to suffer. So, for example, after castles, we'll exchange on f3. Well, bishop takes allows rook takes c4. There, told you that rook looks good on the c file. Rook takes f3. Knight g4. Wow. How is white's king feeling here? Pretty nervous, I'm telling you. The rook is going to come to e8. Those knights are great. The queen is going to slide out onto one of these squares. That bishop is amazing. Every single one of black's pieces rather looks good. Excuse me. Yeah, all black's pieces are in play. So white got worried, understandably so, and played f4. Trying to kind of hold things together, trying to keep the position closed. But it's too late. Queen b6, great move. Stops white castling, looks at b2. a5 played. You could just dip back here, but queen c5, that's very provocative. But it works out extremely well. I mean, this queen should be pushed away. It's going to come back here anyway. And then, well, I mean, I like black's position here. White can't castle, you know, that's the bottom line. But after queen c5, white neglected to push the queen away, played rook a3, and knight takes d5. missing a tactic. There's a simple pin here. So this wins a pawn, and, well, on white it's just lost here. You know, if this is taken, queen takes c2, black is breaking through. Once again, all black's pieces are in play. They're beautifully coordinated. Rook b3 played. Well, black decided to just snaffle another pawn. Why not? Check. And the queen just slid back to safety. Very nice. It's a rotten position. If castles, you can still go for the hammer move, b5, exploiting that pin. But white took on d5. Queen takes c2. The endgame isn't a lot of fun for white. Rook takes. Queen takes. And rook c5. Yeah, great move. This pawn on c4 has been knocked away. So why not attack that weakling on d5? I love it. Bishop takes. Rook a8. Oh, thank you very much. Rook number 2 comes into play. Rook takes pawn on d5. What's the score? Black's a pawn up with a crushing position. Well, really, white can't defend against the attack. e3. White now gave away a whole rook. And after a couple more moves, well, here, white played king d1 and, well, either lost on time or resigned. I'm not sure what happened. Anyway, black won the game. Black is a whole rook up, which certainly isn't bad. And there's more to come, actually. Check. Rook takes d2. And a knight fork to finish. That wins even more material. Well, congratulations to Christian Sauder on playing a superb game. I have to say, really impressed, and thank you for sending it to me. Like I said, so many of the ideas employed in this game are absolutely typical of the Kalashnikov. The kingside pawn majority, opening things up with e4, absolutely typical. And yeah, in those earlier variations as well, the possible lines, things like the Trojan horse, are absolutely typical as well. So if you're interested in learning more about it, then do check out the book, King's Kalashnikov Sicilian, and also the Chessable course as well. Thanks for watching.